For most of human history, blindness was considered absolute. If you were born without sight, the world was something you would never know. You could hear it, you could touch it, you could imagine it, but you would never see it. At least, that's what everyone believed. Until modern medicine quietly proved something far more disturbing. Some people who were blind from birth did regain vision, and when they opened their eyes for the first time, what they saw was not beauty, not clarity, not the world they had imagined. What they saw was chaos. The moment the bandages come off after a successful sight-restoring surgery is often portrayed as emotional and miraculous. Tears, gasps, smiles. But in real clinical settings, something very different often happens. The patient opens their eyes, light enters, and instead of recognition, there is confusion. Instead of joy, there is fear. Instead of seeing a face, they see moving patches of brightness and shadow that make no sense at all. Because vision is not just about light entering the eyes. Vision is about the brain knowing what to do with that light. And for someone blind from birth, the brain has never learned that language. In several documented cases between 2015 and 2025, patients born with conditions like Leber congenital amaurosis underwent gene therapy or stem cell-based retinal surgery. The procedures worked. Photoreceptors began sending signals. The eyes were technically seen, but the mind was unprepared. One patient described the first minutes as overwhelming, not beautiful. Colors appeared as floating stains with no edges. Objects blended into one another. Depth did not exist. A hand moving closer did not grow larger, it simply became more intense. Faces were especially disturbing. The brain could not separate eyes from mouths or expressions from shadows. Loved ones stood in front of them, speaking, smiling, crying, and they were unrecognizable. This phenomenon was documented decades earlier by neurologist Oliver Sacks in his famous essay To See and Not See. He described patients who gained sight after lifelong blindness and found the experience terrifying. One man could identify objects by touch instantly, but failed to recognize the same objects. Visually, a cube was not a cube, a sphere was not round. Vision, he realized, was not an automatic upgrade. It was a skill that had to be learned. Modern neuroscience confirms this. Studies from Project Prakash admit followed children and adults who received sight-restoring surgeries. What they discovered challenged one of the deepest assumptions about the human brain. The visual cortex is not born fully knowing how to interpret the world. It develops through experience. Without early visual input, the brain repurposes itself. In blind individuals, regions normally dedicated to vision are often used for sound, language, and touch. The brain becomes efficient in darkness. When vision suddenly arrives years later, those neural networks are already occupied. The brain must either rewire itself or reject the new input. This is why some patients struggle for months. Some never fully adapt. They can detect motion, but not recognize objects. They can see color, but not meaning. They can perceive light, but not space. One of the most unsettling findings is that many patients report seeing less than they expected. Before surgery, they often dream visually. They imagine faces, landscapes, colors. But after gaining sight, they say the real world feels flatter, noisier, less coherent than their dreams. The imagined world was structured by understanding. The real world arrives without instructions. A woman treated in her 30s described seeing her own face for the first time. She did not recognize it as herself. It was simply a shape in the mirror that moved when she moved. The concept of reflection had to be learned. The idea that an image could represent the self was not intuitive. Children adapt more easily than adults, but even they struggle. Depth perception, face recognition, and object permanence take time. A staircase looks like a painting. A shadow appears as a hole. A tree looks like a vertical blur unless touched. One child from Project Prakash, after surgery, refused to walk alone. The world looked unstable. Objects shifted as he moved. The brain had not yet learned how motion relates to space. Balance, which had been guided by sound and touch, was disrupted by vision. Over months, something remarkable can happen. Slowly, the brain begins to reassign resources. Shapes stabilize, edges appear. Faces gain structure. Meaning emerges. But this process is not guaranteed. In follow-up interviews, researchers found that some patients chose to stop using vision altogether. They closed their eyes. They relied on touch and sound instead. Not because vision failed medically, but because it failed cognitively. The cost of learning to see was too high. One adult patient explained it simply. Blindness was familiar. Vision was work. This challenge is a cultural myth. We assume sight is always preferable, but the brain values efficiency, not romance. If vision arrives too late, it may never fully integrate into the system. Recent studies published in Nature Neuroscience between 2024 and 2025 show that neuroplasticity has limits. There appears to be a sensitive window during early childhood, when vision shapes the brain's architecture. Outside that window, adaptation becomes slower and incomplete. Gene therapy trials for retinal diseases continue to improve. More patients will regain sight, but neuroscientists now understand that surgery is only the beginning. Rehabilitation is not just physical, it is cognitive. Patients must learn what lines mean, what faces are, what space feels like when it is seen rather than touched. Some describe the moment when meaning finally clicks. Not light, not color, meaning. The moment when a face becomes a person, when a shape becomes a chair, when depth becomes distance. It is subtle, quiet, and deeply emotional, but for others, that moment never fully arrives. The most haunting realization comes from those who lived without sight for decades. They often say blindness was not darkness. It was normal. Vision introduced confusion, expectations, disappointment. Seeing was not the miracle they were promised. Science rarely talks about this side of progress. The forgotten people who could see without eyes were not missing something. Their brains had built an entire world without vision. When sight arrived, it was not a gift. It was an intrusion. As medical technology advances, we may restore more senses. But the brain is not a blank slate waiting for upgrades. It is a living system shaped by history. And sometimes, what we restore is not what the mind wants. In the end, these cases force a deeper question. What does it really mean to see? Is it light? Is it color? Or is it understanding? Because understanding, not vision, may be the rarest form of sight.